So we finished with sexual harassment. Now we're going to talk about going to jail over using the microwave in the kitchen. You thought that sexual harassment was overboard. So how many of you are tired of talking about HB 163? And a lot of the response, we got a lot of elected officials that got really concerned about this when they found out what the law actually said. Unfortunately, the sponsor of the bill had no idea what the law said. It became very apparent as we talked to him after the fact that he just got the bill from the AG's office and figured that everything was okay. But they never contacted the league, they never contacted UAC, never talked to any of the public entities that this would affect. And many of the elected officials just thought that it went too far and created some limitations that really do make it impossible for you to provide any conveniences to your employees without them becoming felons. So let's take a look at it, make sure you understand why this has become such a concern, because I had some ethics training planned in one of the counties prior to the bill passing and finding out about it. And before I conducted that training, I added some information about HB 163 because I already had been training on the fact that under the ethics law, it was probably a misdemeanor to misuse public equipment already. But when I suggested that now it will be a felony, and immediately the auditor there in that county said, well, geez, if you conduct a felony in office, you lose your URS benefit. And at the end of that presentation, I had 3 law enforcement officers come to me and say, we've all decided we are terminating our employment, we're resigning and retiring on June 30th, because we are not going to put our URS benefit in jeopardy because of this. And so the employees have been reacting very strongly to it too. So again, this is in the abuses of government or offenses against the administration of government section of the statute, which covers abuse of office and unauthorized acts as a government official. That section also talks about corrupt practices, where the bribery statute shows up, and that's why I caught this bill, because in my ethics training I talk about bribery and the difference between bribery and simply taking a gift. And so when I knew that was in the offenses against the administration of government section, so when I saw that there was a bill amending it, I thought, I better check this and see if they changed anything to have to do with the bribery statute, that I need to update my training on it, and found this. But at that point, the bill had already passed, was waiting for signature, but no one at UAC, no one at the league had any idea that this bill was out there. The other things that are talked about in this section of the criminal code are obstructing governmental operations, threatening elected officials, interfering with a peace officer, and offenses against public property, and prohibitions to misuse of public money. And that was the extent of that section that talks about public property. Is it talked about you can't misuse money in public service. And what this bill did in 163 was to extend that to you also can't misuse public property. And it's just the way that they did it. So it added public property to the misuse of public money prohibitions. It makes all personal use of public property that is not authorized use, and authorized use means in writing, a violation of the officer employee that uses the public property. It also creates a violation for an official that allowed unauthorized personal use due to failure to keep that public property. So not only is the employee violated the act for using that public property when it wasn't authorized in writing by the entity, but if their supervisor knew that they were doing it and said, no big deal, that supervisor is also guilty of violating the act. Again, this is in the criminal code. So a lot of people, you know, when some of the elected officials and I started explaining to them what this was saying and that they needed to put in, review their policies on what uses are out there. A lot of people, the governor's office for one said, well, so what? Big deal. This is not a big deal. Well, no, it's important because clarifying that unauthorized personal use is a crime, I mean, that's okay. You know, I've worked in several different states with counties and cities, and in every other state I've ever worked in, it was in the criminal code that an employee of a government agency that misused the property and funds, it was a crime. And it was very clear. And for some of you who have asked me to come out because you've had a problem in the past of employees thinking that it's a perk to use the county's equipment on the weekends and in the evenings, and they get pretty liberal about it, and so you want to make sure that they understand that that's not necessarily okay. So I've come out and done training. Again, I've focused in the past on the County Disclosure Act, which is our version of the Ethics Act for counties, that says that you can't use your office for special privilege. And if you have access to a piece of property that the general public doesn't have, that's special privilege, right? That you have only because you're a government employee or officer. So you violated the Ethics Act, which is a misdemeanor. So that's how I've done the training before. So the fact that now it's in the criminal code that you can't do this, and it's very, very clear, there's no interpretation there that needs to be had that is that really special privilege or is it not, is okay. It's just the way that they did it that causes some problems. First one is there are no qualifiers or quantifiers, meaning even the smallest unauthorized personal use is a violation. And even though in that same code, if you misuse money, so you have a county credit card. How many of you have a county credit card? Yeah, they're spending the evening with the treasurers. They're not quite so excited about that. They're supposed to disperse all monies to the county, and yet there's all these credit cards everywhere. So you accidentally grab your county credit card and use it for a $50 charge. That's a misdemeanor. And you use the microwave in the kitchen, that's a felony under this law. There's no differentiation. So that was one of the concerns that elected officials had. And again, so what? You know, why should people be using government-owned equipment for their own personal use? And again, it's a felony no matter what the size of the violation. So you have potential jail time, loss of liberty, and potential fines that are there. Disqualification from holding office. I mean, the Ethics Act says you shall be removed from employment or office. This says you're disqualified from holding public office, which means now you have to let that county employee go. They can't go work for the city. They can't go work for the state. They can't run for public office. That's far more than many other things that I think are bigger violations against the taxpayer than this. And again, under UCA Title 49, Chapter 11, if you commit a felony while under the commission of your duties of office in UCIP, the employer's portion of all URS benefits that were paid in over the years are returned to the county. So the only retirement benefits that person has are what they took out of their own paycheck and put into 401k. So all they did, if they were tier 1, like a lot of them are and don't contribute anything else, they're just going to rely on their tier 1, they've lost it all. for committing a felony.
Johnny?
Yes.
So just the statement where it says violation is a felony no matter the size of violation, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it still based upon a monetary value of what you're misusing?
No. Not for the property. For the money, it is. If you use, I can't remember the exact dollar amount. It's like less than $100, it's a Class B misdemeanor. Less than $500, it's Class A, and striated like that, but not for property. I think it's over. You have to be over $1,000 of misusing actual money of the county before it becomes a felony. But any use of property is a felony under this law. It also doesn't specify who enforces this. So any agency can begin an investigation and push for felony charges with any prosecutor, which is another area, another reason why a lot of officials were very concerned about this bill being weaponized. How many of you feel like there's a civility problem in government these days? Okay, you guys that are ticketed didn't raise your hand. There is. I mean, in the last 3-4 years, that the increase in the number of allegations against public officials for wrongdoing has just skyrocketed. And it's amazing how, we've had several situations where there's been an allegation made against an official or an employee, and it's been checked out by more than one agency, and yet some other agency still decides to pick it up and do another investigation. And so many officials aren't so concerned, and of course the county attorneys, their position is, well, it's not like I'm wasting my time prosecuting a felony for somebody who took a laptop home over the weekend and checked their email on it. I'm not going to prosecute that. Well, no, but when it's in the headline, got an election coming up, and the headline will be in the newspapers, official under investigation for felony charge. That's worse than the felony charge, right? For somebody whose livelihood depends on getting reelected. So that's one of the things that is a real concern here is anybody can start up an investigation and claim that they're doing an investigation, and it would be true that they're investigating for a felony violation and that the person has committed a felony. It's just whether or not they're going to prosecute or not. They're likely not going to prosecute, but by then the damage has been done. So what do? We have to review all the potential personal use of public property and adopt policies and authorize or prohibit personal use of public property. Some of the personal use examples that I put together, because again, as I've gone out and done training and had people call me and say, here's something that's going on in our county, can you come out and do some training because we want to start nipping this in the bud and not having them do this anymore. But of course we have the really common ones, phone systems, cell phones, computers, laptops, software, copiers and printers. I mean, pretty much every government employee has access to those things, right? And are regularly using those things to do their work. So we have to, and many of us already have policies on to what extent can you use those on an incidental de minimis basis, and it's okay, and where that line is of when it's not okay any longer. But some of the things that not all employees have access to, that some do, vehicles, whether they're owned or rented. So go to a conference and you fly somewhere for a conference and you rent a vehicle, but now you have an afternoon off during that conference and you want to go and see the sights. You're committing a felony if the county is paying for that rented vehicle. Because when they say public property, the definition of public property in this code is anything the county owns, leases, rents, or maintains. Fuel cards have been a problem in the past, haven't they? And just, again, the fuel, you use that rented vehicle, whether you prepaid for the gas or you fill it back up at the end, and the county's paid for that fuel, but some of those miles were you on a sightseeing trip, you violated the code. Trailers, I see that quite often as something that employees use on their spare time. On the weekends and things, just grab one of the county trailers and use it to move something over the weekend. Handheld tools in the shops, light equipment. It's amazing how sometimes the backhoes and skid steers and things like that make their way to somebody's house over the weekend. Even heavy equipment, the plow that goes up and down the long driveway during the snowstorm and doesn't stick to the county road. Drones, I think, is one that already is being used for personal use outside of their employment, and will probably get even worse as time goes by and more counties have drones. Surveying equipment, actual cameras and projectors and weapons and ammunition, tactical gear. I mean, this is a real problem for the Sheriff's Association. The Sheriff's Association has had me come and meet with them twice on this issue now already, that they're very concerned that traditionally they've had a lot of what appears to be personal use of the equipment that they see some benefit to the county for. And we'll talk about that, but they're very concerned about this. And things that we provide to the employees as conveniences, right? We're employers. We need to be somewhat competitive with the marketplace, and a lot of employers these days provide exercise equipment, daycare facilities, meeting rooms, things of that sort that we often provide that as well. How many of you have a lunchroom at the county that you provide equipment for? How many of you have exercise equipment provided to some or all employees in the county? Okay. Felony. Unless you, and you can't authorize that use under this bill.
You cannot or you can?
You cannot. And I'll get to why you can't in a second. But some of us also have event centers that maybe we let employees use. Hey, if nobody else is using that meeting room or the event center on the weekend and you want to use it on a Thursday night, let's say some night that it wouldn't be busy, go ahead and use it. It's okay. Can't be doing that. At least one county that has golf courses and has at least provided discounted use of the golf course. Swimming pools, shooting ranges. So there's a lot of things that don't come to mind right away that are being used that now we have to consider as we look at our policies as whether or not we are going to authorize them and how are we going to authorize them.
So how does it affect it if we have personal items that we take to work and use for work? Is there any kind of...
Oh no, there's a double standard there.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you use your own personal equipment for work, that's okay, and that you don't get any real benefit back for the fact that you're using your own personal equipment.
If it breaks,
them.
replace it.
But if you use the employer's property for your personal use, that is really, 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 really bad, apparently, in the eyes of the legislature.
Johnny, how does this apply to search and rescue or volunteers using county-owned equipment for their personal use?
Public servant includes any officer, employee, or volunteer. So yeah, search and rescue, whether they're part-time or volunteer, this applies to them. So again, some of the reasons that I've heard over the years as far as why we let employees use county equipment for personal use is it's considered an employee benefit. I mean, the broker I used to work for, I had an employee, a car that was provided to me by the brokerage. Until the IRS made it a big issue, they didn't care how much personal use I put on that vehicle. That was a part of the benefit of working for them. It's a convenience both for the county and the employee. So providing that employee lunchroom with a refrigerator and a microwave and those sorts of things, it's convenient for the employee, but it's convenient for you too because they're not leaving the workplace during their lunch hour. And at least from the perspective of workers' comp injury, if you're not providing that on the workplace and they have to go out for lunch, you're buying that workers' comp claim when they get injured, potentially at lunchtime. So it does, there are situations where it does provide some benefit to the county as well as the employee. The one I hear from search and rescue particularly is, you know, they are volunteer, we don't give them a lot of training time, and they have to become familiar with this equipment that is often, you know, pretty technical. Night vision goggles, GPSs, things like that. So yeah, we let them take them and use them on the deer hunt so that they become familiar with it, so that they're ready to use it when they need to. I can buy that. Some of you may not, but I can. So that's one of the reasons that counties have allowed their employees to use the equipment. Again, some personal uses do provide a direct benefit to the county. One of them that I hear, or the personal use provides a benefit to the community. So, well, yeah, I want to use this piece of equipment on the weekend because I'm volunteering to the local chamber, and I'm going to use the county equipment for this event that the chamber's putting on. Is there anybody that thinks at least one of their commissioners would say, great, do it, that's awesome, we're supporting the chamber. But no, you can't be doing that now. But those are reasons why we have been doing it. So some of the issues that we need to address in our policy, you know, I've been working with UAC and collecting drafts of policies as they're coming in. I've been working with the civil attorneys group. We've met 4 or 5 times as a group with the civil attorneys to go over this. And so we've been sending those out again to the counties as samples for people to work on. And there's a lot of different versions out there. And I think that even the versions that we've sent out, each individual county attorney's office has tinkered with it a little bit, which is fine, but we don't have a lot of, you know, real consistency there. Some of the things that we want to make sure that we're addressing, because I heard from several county attorneys and HR directors and auditors who are watching this closely that, well, we have a personal use policy, so we're okay. And I say, perfect. Can you send me that personal use policy so that I can send it out to others? And then I review their personal use policy and we get on the phone. And their personal use policy did not address the things that need to be addressed to protect their employee from unintentionally violating the code. Personal use on premise versus personal use off premises. Damage to property during the personal use should be addressed in your policy. So now they take, you know, I had one county that the guys in the road department that did weed spraying would use the weed sprayers on the weekend to go home and do their own weed spraying in their yard. What's the value of using a weed sprayer, a portable backpack weed sprayer on the weekend? What's the cost to the county for somebody doing that? Minimal, right? But what happens when they break that? So they go in the back of the truck and they're coming back to work on Monday and they hit their brakes and it slides in the bed of the truck and now it's broken. So you need to address that issue. How are you going to deal with that they damaged the county's property while they were using it for personal use? And again, personal use for others. So they're doing it, but they're doing it for some charitable organization in the community or something like that. And how are you going to address that in your, because again, if the elected officials want them to be doing that, They think that that's great, that they're helping out a charitable organization or doing a fundraiser on the weekend, that you need to have that in your policy now to authorize it. So you need to, if you're going to do a policy where you're going to take the position that we're going to just identify what is authorized and what is prohibited, which is where most counties started with. Well, that's how we'll deal with this, is we'll start with our policy we have now, and we'll just look at it really closely and make sure that we're authorizing everything that we need to and prohibit everything that we need to. But you got to address all potential personal use. How many of you just in the last couple of slides have seen things that you hadn't thought about yet? A few, yeah. Coordinate all policies to address any conflicts. This is another big issue because in two separate areas in this bill, it says any personal use must be authorized in writing by the agency. Then elsewhere it says, and no use, any use that is prohibited in any policy of the agency is prohibited. So, some counties have an overall HR policy, right? And some of you deal with some departments that have their own little mini policies too, right? If it's authorized in the overall policy, but it's prohibited in the department policy, it's prohibited in the entire county. Because there is a policy of the agency that prohibits that use. You read the bill very literally, that's what it does. So that was one of the big concerns of the sheriff's department was, well, so we can write in our own policy authorizing things that they're not going to authorize in the rest of the county. No, you can't. You have to coordinate that so that it's authorized everywhere in the county or prohibited everywhere in the county and not spotty. Now within your overall policy, you might be able to make some distinctions for public safety versus other employees or something along those lines, because we already do that for some things, right? This all had to be in place by July 1st. The bill went into effect July 1st, and the problem with that date is the bill also says the agency cannot retroactively authorize use. So if you didn't think about something, and now you get on a complaint that I just saw your county employee on Saturday with the county vehicle at Walmart, and they were not working. You can't go back and say, oops, well, we need to authorize that now. You can't authorize it retroactively. And the only exception to that authorized use is that it does say in the bill that incidental use is okay. The problem there is that they use the term incidental, where most of us that have policies talk about de minimis, don't we? And we do that because of the IRS issues that the auditors have always had to deal with. That de minimis use, the IRS lets go, and you don't have to 1099 your employee for that, for the value of that use and everything. So we're all okay with de minimis, and under the IRS, that seems to be under $100 is considered de minimis.
I got caught for a $25 gift card. I got an IRS audit in 2008, and we were giving our employees one $25 gift card for Christmas. And because the check we wrote to the company in which we bought the gift cards was so high, because I had to buy so many, they told me it fell outside of the minimus, and they wanted me to open up every single solitary employee's W-2 and put that $25 gift card on their W-2. We said no, because this is 2 years out. I'm not going to make everybody refile their taxes. So we took the fine, and we paid both FICAs. So the 7.65% on the $25. So We have determined that there is no such thing as de minimis in our office. If you get a $10 gift card, I'm putting it on your W-2.
And I'm not sure if they brought this up, but I know in the ethics code, they make a differentiation between what is pecuniary and what is non-pecuniary. A gift card is like cash, it's pecuniary.
I said I could give him a turkey, but I can't give him a gift card.
Right.
Because you might get money back from that gift card.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about using public property, use that wouldn't go over $50, I think you'd be safe, real safe. But if the cost to the county of the use isn't over $100, you would probably be okay if they would have used the term de minimis in the bill, but they didn't. They used incidental. So you go to Black's Law Dictionary and Webster's Dictionary when they don't, and they didn't define incidental. So you look at the definition of incidental. So here's my example. We're using the county telephone system now, public property. And I call Jonathan, and I'm talking to Jonathan about an issue that he has down there in Washington County. And we talk business, and at the end of the call, Jonathan says, well, you said you were coming down here next weekend. What you up to? Oh, I'm coming down to do some mountain biking down there. And we have a few minutes of personal conversation. That's incidental, right? Because we were on business on that call. But I pick up the phone and I call Jonathan. I'm coming down to do some more mountain biking down there. Can you give me some heads up on some of the better trails and where should I stay, things like that? That's not incidental. I use that public piece of equipment for purely personal use. That's the strict definition of incidental. So I'll tell you in a minute how we use that to our advantage in writing policies, the sample policies that we put out. So authorized use, any incidental use is automatically authorized under the bill. So the incidental use of public property for a personal matter by a public servant is if the value of the public use substantially outweighs the value of the personal use, and the incidental use is not prohibited by any law or policy, then it can be okay because it's incidental. But again, the public use has to substantially outweigh the value of the personal use. And this went into the bill, and make no mistake about it, this bill was written because one state official was upset with a county official that wanted to put him out of office. And it was very specific on the types of uses that county official, well, it's a county official that also was the head of a special service district, interlocal agency. But anyway, one of the things that the state auditors had a real problem with is districts and boards in some counties that buy iPads for their boards and commissions. And so they come in and the reasoning is, well, we like to send out their packet in PDF rather than having a big, thick, wasting trees. And so now they've got that iPad so that when they come in every other week or once a month, however often the commission meetings are, they're using that iPad, and the rest of the time they're toting it around and using it 24/7. And yes, they may be checking their county email on it from time to time, but in that situation, if they're using it more for personal use, they're not using it substantially more for doing their duties of office than what they're using it for personal use, it's not incidental. It can't be incidental, and it can't be authorized either. Okay? So that's the problem with just the fact that they said incidental and didn't define it in the statute. Now, authorized personal use, these are the things that you can authorize. If the public servant is authorized to use or possess the property to fulfill their public duties. So number one, they have to use that equipment to do their job. This is the reason why the refrigerators and the microwaves can't be authorized. Do they use that microwave in the lunchroom to conduct their duties of office? No. And if you don't use the equipment to conduct your duties of office, it cannot be authorized for personal use. The primary purpose of the use by the public servant is to fulfill their public duties. So if you have a piece of property that it's not something that they use regularly as a primary piece of property that they use to conduct their duties, you also can't authorize it. Can't be authorized. And again, the written policy must be in effect at the time of use. Can't be retroactive. And the public servant uses the property in a lawful manner and in accordance with the policy, which that makes sense. You know, they're not going to use it to commit a crime, some other crime other than just simply using it. Okay? So those are some of the things that really create the problem of they just didn't even think about the property that we provide to the employees as a convenience, because now we can't authorize it. So, as far as getting it done, was two theories of thought here as we went through all the different drafts and talked with the county attorneys. We really ended up with two types of policies that the counties have been adopting. The first one is to attempt to broadly identify those uses that are authorized and those that are prohibited. And what I suggested that caught hold was I was writing my policy for UCIP because we don't have a lot of company-owned equipment, but we have some. And I wanted to make sure that we had policies to set the example. So what I did is, because they didn't define incidental, I did in the policy. And I included in the incidental definition anything that's available for use by the general public. If an employee uses it, that's incidental. Any piece of equipment that provides any benefit to the agency is then incidental. Any property that is provided as an employee convenience or an employee benefit is incidental. And used that incidental definition to take care of those items that we want to let them use for personal use that we can't authorize directly. Does that make sense? And that caught on to the point where, for those of you who have seen I was concerned about that, if like the state would get upset that we were using that definition of incidental and making it up ourselves to get around some of the prohibitions that the state auditor wanted to put into this bill. But the State Department of Human Resources actually adopted that same method. So their policy that they're sending out to all of their agencies does that. It defines incidental use and includes all those things under their incidental use definition. And again, if you do it that way and then be outside of the incidental use, you just do your homework and figure out where are people really actually using our equipment for personal use and cover all your bases, make it authorized or prohibited. Okay. Some counties, though, given the short time frame that was allowed to us, because part of the problem here was a lot of the elected officials went right to the governor as soon as they found out that this passed and said, do not sign this. But the governor was hearing from the AG's office, well, we wrote it. There's no problem with this. They're overreacting to this. So he signed it with the promise that he would provide UAC and the league a sample policy to take care of all the problems that the elected officials were expressing to the governor's office. After about a month and a half of waiting for this sample policy from the state, Lincoln Schertz, the lobbyist at UAC, and I got on the phone with the head of the Department of Human Resources that was tasked with putting together that sample policy. And as we were talking to her, she was reading the bill. They had not even looked at it yet. So we got way behind on providing the counties any guidance on this. So because time got really short, some counties adopted what became known as no disrespect to Wasatch County, but the Wasatch model.
Yeah.
Because it came out of the Wasatch County Attorney's Office. Their position was, and they have a bunch of whereases, and in the whereases they talk about, because this is a felony, and because the penalty for a felony in office is so extreme, we are going to protect our employees from unintentionally committing a felony while in the conduct of their duties. And we're not going to put them in a situation where they might be even under scrutiny for a felony for use that someone feels is a personal use that really isn't personal. So the way they approached it was, they say in their policy, all use of public equipment by our employees and officers is authorized until a department head puts it in writing that that specific use is not okay, stop it. And then there's a grievance process if they don't agree that they should stop using the property that way, to give them some due process. Sounds like a lot. When that strategy was first thrown out at one of these meetings of the civil county attorneys, a couple of them like belly laughed. Are you serious? You can't be serious with this, right? You're gonna, in front of the media, you're gonna say that all use of public equipment is authorized? By the end of that meeting, the ones that were belly laughing were saying, I think I'm absolutely going to have this as an option for my county. And some of them completely changed around and said, there is no way I have time to do number one. So I'm going with number two. And some people think of it as number three. That's okay. I don't like it. But we're in a really tough spot. We're between a rock and a hard place. So I know many of your counties have adopted this number two. How much time do I have?
Another hour.
Oh, okay. No. So, that puts us in a particular spot though, right? As from the HR perspective, because they're passing these policies saying, we're doing this to protect the employees from violating the law, but now we have to marshal it as we go. Because now it's the wild, wild west. They all the dog first gets its first bite. They can take that piece of equipment and use it, and it's okay until you put it in writing that they can't do that anymore. So we need to get a little proactive. If your county has passed that policy, either one of these policies, do you think you've got some work to do? How many of you were assigned to put this, was HR assigned to put this policy together? Any of you? Assisting with it, at least with the county attorney's office? But I think now you want to be coordinating definitely to make sure that if you pass option one, that you're looking to see, are there uses that are happening that we didn't contemplate, that we need to add to the policy? Question back there.
Yeah, so at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that there's things that you just can't authorize anyway, and so I'm a little confused by this right here. Because they are authorizing it, even though the state would say you shouldn't do that. Or maybe I'm misunderstanding it.
Well, because that number two,
Yeah,
they do that on top of the very broad definition of incidental. So the things that you can't authorize that I talked about are defined as incidental.
oh, so you took that one, okay.
Yes, so you combine the two. So it's anything that's incidental, which is if we provide it to you as an employee benefit, and whether or not you use it, even if you don't use it to perform your duties, if we provide it to you as a convenience, that's incidental. And then any other use is authorized, is the way that, there's still some problems with some equipment there.
So what's your opinion, Johnny, on number two? The law is the law, right? House bill says no personal use, but here we are drafting policies allowing it because there's that quasi caveat that we can. Which one stands?
if it's authorized in writing, it's in compliance with the bill, with the law. The real test here, and I talked to the commissioners, at the UAC spring conference, I did a presentation on this, and the real concern here was, what's the media going to say? When they pass that policy, that the media is going to come back and say, what do you mean you're going to let them use property that's been paid for with taxpayer dollars, and they can use it for their own personal use as much as they want? That this is ridiculous. We're voting you right out of office. But they were prepared, the ones that have passed this, with that. Number one, again, we want to protect the employees because we think this bill's gone way too far. Using the microwave in the kitchen should not be a felony, that they can't ever work for a government agency again and lose their retirement. And we intend to prohibit things. We're just going to do it specifically as we see them occurring. We are going to prohibit things that cannot be utilized. So with either one, I think we still have a lot of work to do in the interim to watch and make sure that if you know that you did think of something and used option 1, get an update to your policy. Do you have a question?
You just keep bringing up microwaves. I haven't asked Jonathan this question, so I'm not going over his head in any way. Yeah, some people have their own, there might be a group of employees that kind of have their own microwave in a certain area of the office. In my office set, there's probably a dozen or 15 people that have personal refrigerators. Sometimes people stream music on the internet while they're doing their work. These are all questions that, since this all July 1st business has come out, they're wondering, am I okay to be plugging all this stuff in, streaming all this music? One person has a neon cactus that they plug in as part of the decoration in there. So it sounds ridiculous that they couldn't do that.
But technically, it violates that bill without taking care of it in policy. The use of that county property, the power that's not authorized, is a violation. No matter, even though it's small, because it's not incidental. They're not plugging in that decoration incidental to doing their job, right? It is personal.
It's personal holiday decorations, things people do, in their workspace. It's a morale thing, but we provide a refrigerator in our office, but most of it, like I said, probably a third of my office or more has their own personal refrigerator.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And again, that's the funny part. And some people have tried this argument with the state auditor that, well, we look at the amount of benefit that we get from employees bringing in their own personal equipment, like was asked earlier. What's the harm in a little give and take here? That they bring in their own laptop because it's a much better machine than the one that we provide them as the county to do their work. What's the harm in when we let them stream music on their personal laptop in our office that goes against our data plan? But state auditor doesn't care. That's still misusing public funds. So for as long as we have to live with the law the way it reads right now, this is our charge, is to be working with the elected officials and the county attorney's office to make sure that we are making updates, either making changes to our policy if we adopted option 1, or writing letters, providing written notification to employees every time that we see use that we want stopped. And again, most of those policies say that there's a grievance policy, so that's where you guys are going to come in to that process, right? Okay. So, going forward, again, after the fact, when we sat down with the sponsor and talked about some of these concerns, how difficult it would be to actually write a policy that takes care of all the problems, and the fact that the state had no idea how to deal with it after we talked to them. I mean, they were at a total loss when we talked to DHR. Oh, wow, we didn't realize that it said that. I don't know how we're going to deal with that. So the bill sponsor has already opened a bill file for next year, for the next legislative session, to make changes to this. He's also, at the specific request of UAC, asked the governor to put it on the special session if and when they have a special session, because of that we want to take care of it. And I think that the fact that so many counties chose option 2 has positioned that very well, that now the legislature needs to go back and fix it, because they don't want the option 2 policies sitting out there, and neither do we. We don't want those out there, but we need to protect our employees. So now they want to get this fixed as quickly as possible so that you can all adopt more reasonable policies than their option 1, right? And as we're doing that, we've already started on the type of things that we'd be looking at to put in the new policy, like the things that we identified already as incidental, either define them very clearly as incidental in the legislation or make other accommodation for them. So again, anything that you as an employer decide to provide personal use as a convenience or as an employee benefit, that's going to be okay. And you don't have to use your own personal incidental use in order to do that. And again, because now the state's policy says all those things, I think we're going to have a real good ability to be able to do that. That they use it substantially more for their own personal public duties than for the personal use. We'll want to deal with that. I talked earlier about the county that had the road department guys using the weed sprayers on the weekend. And when the HR department was the one that contacted me about it, and the county attorney's office, they had both heard about it, somebody brought it up. And it wasn't a complaint from the public saying, hey, they're misusing my tax dollars. It was another employee in another department that said, why do they get to use the weed sprayer and I don't? Just because I don't work in the road department, why can't I use the weed sprayer on the weekend? So the county didn't prohibit that use. They opened it up to all the county employees. So again, now if you're going to do that, and they actually created a check-in, check-out system for different types of equipment, and of course then it started to blossom that it wasn't just the weed sprayers, it was other types of equipment too, that you can check out in the evenings and weekends for personal use. Well, for the road guys that substantially use that weed sprayer all day during the day to do their job, that's okay. But now you get the person from the auditor's office that's using that weed sprayer, and they never use it for work. But now to get to use it for personal, we'll need to deal with that in the bill as well. So that if your elected officials decide to allow that type of use, they'll get elected or not elected in the next election based on their decision. But that's the way our government works. They get to decide, and the people get to judge them and their performance on those types of things at election time. The other thing that we're looking into is when we did all the cross-referencing of other statutes that have to do with this, as we're looking at writing the policy and denoting the policy and those things, how many of you allow an employee that uses the public property, or either intentionally or unintentionally, they grab the wrong card and they use the company or the county credit card by mistake, that you allow them to just reimburse you? Most do, right? How many of you charge them 150% of what they used? Because the statute says you shall. Yes. Title 11, I think it is, requires that when an employee uses public funds or public property for, and is reimbursing the county or the agencies, not just counties, it's all government agencies, when you reimburse that back, the statute says that they shall reimburse and pay a 50% administration fee. And it's not something that you have an option. It's not a may, it's a shall. And I haven't found a county yet that actually was doing that. Not a big deal if they use the copier or they're having a lawn sale, and so they print off a bunch of flyers. And so now they owe you for 100 sheets of paper. So they reimburse 150%. Not a big deal, right? But if any of you are staying here at the hotel on the county credit card, and you decide that you're going to stay an extra day and reimburse the county, reimbursing 150% of your hotel bill for one night is starting to get up there, right? So that's another thing that is, because we found that, we've talked at UAC about potentially changing that and saying that the county can charge an administration fee up to 50%. And again, letting you and your elected officials decide, are we going to charge them an administration fee? And if so, we can decide how much it's going to be, rather than having it. Because when they say shall, and it's 50%, it's more of a penalty than covering the cost to the county, right? So those are some of the things that we are working on to make sure are covered as we work on the bill. So how many of you, once your policies have been passed, have either conducted or have scheduled training on the new policy? I only saw one hand. So I know that some counties that passed option 2 are shying away from doing any training on it because they don't want to let employees know, hey, you get, it's free until your department head catches you and puts it in writing. If it's option 1, I think you definitely want to get that training done to make sure that they understand, hey, if it isn't authorized, you could be in trouble, serious trouble. So be prepared for that. And again, making those policy changes. And again, over the years, as I've gone out and done the training and even the Ethics Act training, with some of the questions I've got during that section, when I talk about using public equipment and how that might be a misdemeanor, some of the questions I get, there's clearly some belief out there by a lot of the employees that, hey, this has gone on for years. This is part of our benefit. It's a perk. We don't get much as county employees. We're underpaid, overworked. The least they can do is, when I get to use the truck, when I get to use the weed sprayer, when I get to use, these other pieces of property, we've just always done it. I don't see why all of a sudden now it's a problem. Well, it's always really been a problem. Just now, we've got people at the state that want to make it a really big deal. One of the things that really scared a lot of the officials, and I've heard this now from so many different sources that I have to believe there's some credibility to it, that the state auditor was in one of the counties talking with the commissioners, and they asked about this, and he said, if you use that county pen that has the county name on it, and I know it's a county pen, to sign a birthday card, I can put you in jail for it. I can throw you out of office and put you in jail for it. And some officials believe that. Certainly, if again, part of the reason this whole bill came to fruition was this person who was county official, head of an interlocal agency, was taking the laptop home so that he could check emails and stuff when he's home on the weekends. And when the auditor came in and audited his agency and looked at everything that was in the history of the laptop, he found that obviously his kids had done some homework on it. And wanted to throw that person out of office and be able to charge them with a felony because their kid grabbed their laptop and used it on the weekend when he had it at home to be able to do some work for the agency on the weekend. So when people say this is no big deal and nobody's ever going to use it, yeah, that was the whole intention of it, was to use it. So if you've heard from people this is not something to be real concerned about, you should be a little concerned. Okay. That was it for my presentation part. So, because I've still got a lot of time,
Talk to us about cell phones, because we go back and forth and we say the county will issue the phones to departments or positions that the county deems should have cell phones. Then we have other departments that say, no, we'll reimburse through payroll and they'll get their own phone. We report it, they get a stipend reimbursement. What's better?
better is a tough term. A lot of the counties went away from the cell phones after the big Tooele IRS audit,
Right.
and that was before the IRS changed their rules on cell phones and made it more liberal. The big difference there with cell phones now is there's a lot of plans that there's no limit on the cellular use. So it doesn't matter that they're using the cell phone for personal use. Like when that audit was done in Tooele, it was still in the days where you were charged for every minute. And so they wanted every single call for every phone highlighted, which ones were business and which ones were personal, and then you had to W-2 the employee for every personal call. That piece went away. By that time, a lot of counties had gone away from having county-issued cell phones. For security purposes, now some counties want to go back to that you have a county-provided cell phone. A lot of the commissioners want them because they don't want emails and documents and stuff sent on their personal phone that are grabbable, and now they might have to give up their cell phone records under a grandma request, so they want that other one. So there's pros and cons both ways. If you give them a stipend, here's one of the problems. Elsewhere in the statute, it talks about, and again, this one says anything that you own, lease, rent, or maintain. Well, if you provide them a stipend, and where elsewhere in the statute it talks about public property is anything that the county even provides a reimbursement for of any type, there's a good argument to be made that even though it's their personal cell phone under their name with Verizon, because you provide them a stipend specifically for that, it's still public property.
Would that have to cover 100% to qualify for what you're trying to describe?
This other section, I'm trying to remember what specifically that section of the statute talks about, but it says if you receive any reimbursement or stipend from the government agency for the use of that piece of equipment, it is considered public property. So you wouldn't have to reimburse 100% of the cell phone.
Just because you're giving them a little bit of money for using their personal phone for work. Like in my office, they use their personal phone to take pictures, they use it to navigate, to look at imagery that we purchased. Just they can log in after they download an app, that sort of thing. If not, then I have to buy phones. for them to take out with them when they, they're gone most of the day.
Right,
They check it back in at night after buy cameras.
right.
I mean, it's just some of this stuff that just doesn't make sense.
And that's why, that's one of the issues we're gonna need to deal with in a bill, when we do the fix-it bill, is how do we deal with that? Because how many of you at one point in time had to carry around 2 cell phones? And how many of you like that? It's a pain, nobody likes to carry cell phones. There are some phones now that can have dual plans. They have 2 different numbers that ring into it and 2 different plans on the same piece of equipment. But again, to have every county switch over to that type of a phone, just so that you can have one plan that the county's paying for and one plan that the employee's paying for is a lot. So I think to deal with it in another way, I know that at UCIP, I told my board, I don't want to be reimbursed for the phone. It's not worth the little bit that you're paying me a month for the fact that I'm using my personal cell phone for personal use or for work to jeopardize this and have a question of whether or not I'm misusing that portion of my phone.
But currently, if your county's done option number 2, and you do use your county phone that they pay you stipend for personal use, probably 15% of the time it's personal use. Is it still, it's okay if you're under option 2?
Yeah, right, because it's been authorized. Yeah. To any extent that it's not covered by the definition of incidental, now it's authorized until they see that the county's plan, they have a limit on the data. And you're streaming videos in the truck all day long, and you're going over your data limit every month that they have to pay for. Now they might write you and say, stop that, and you'd have to stop it. Those are the types of things we need to watch for now, until we can abandon these policies with a better law. Other questions?
Johnny, what about a vehicle allowance? Our health officer and his contracts provided a vehicle allowance.
Same thing, that puts you in a position where it can be argued that vehicle is to some extent public property now because
It's not a car, we just give them money. It's not an actual vehicle.
But if you reimburse
So-
other than their actual expenses, if you they give you their mileage and you reimburse them for their mileage, okay. If you give them an actual stipend, $500 a month for them for their vehicle, there's a clear argument to be made that now becomes public property. Troublesome, isn't it? It shouldn't be, but because of the way they wrote this, it is. Yes.
So what about, I guess the flip side of that, where you issue your employees a county vehicle because they work they leave their home and go to the road. If that employee is in town at the end of the day and they say, well, I have something personal to go to, they park it in the yard, go, get in their own personal and go take care of it. When they come back and drive that vehicle back, and they're not on the clock, should they be clocking back in to drive home in order to avoid any of that, or is that allowed?
Well, their time is a different matter than actually using the equipment at this point. So, there's issues there too when you're letting them use that equipment, especially vehicles, and they're driving them to and from home because you've extended your liability right out of the gates by letting them drive that vehicle to and from home.
And they pay a mileage rate, like they report, like a rate every day that they use it, and so it's kind of a they're taxed on it somehow.
Right.
So
yeah, they should be keeping a mileage log and identifying what is personal use, and then you would tax them for as if it's paid the value of the miles that they put on for personal use. Other questions or concerns you guys have run into that would be helpful as we go into the legislative
Well, those
session?
that drove department vehicles here to go to lunch, they would walk.
See,
You
that's,
have to Uber on your own time.
right.
We didn't choose option 2. We have some limitations.
Yes, yeah. But that's the type of thing that you have to clarify if you use option 1, that, okay, if you use a county vehicle for a conference or something, here's the amount of personal use that is incidental to the use of that vehicle for that conference. And I think at one point I had a sample policy that said 10% of the total miles driven for the conference, or up to 50 miles, whichever is, I can't remember if I said greater or less. So that, because we do, right? You go to a conference, you're gonna go out to dinner. You're gonna go, when you're in St. George, you're gonna go and take a hike. So you're going to the trailhead, you do something like that.
Well, some people are going to take hikes. Others are not going to take hikes.
We define ours on county business travel as reasonable leisure, so meals and reasonable leisure activities during non-conference hours. So we haven't tried to define mileage, but we say, if you're going to go out to dinner and you want to catch a movie because you're out of town, it's authorized. But that reasonable one leaves it a little bit gray.
Right, yeah.
I think that's how we do too. Like more of a back,
Can't
just than a policy.
Not reasonable.
So Jonathan, would it be reasonable if one of the Fox Elder group is in St. George for a conference, but they've never really spent much time down in southern Utah? So they decide they have an afternoon off in the conference to see Dixie. So they take a drive through Zion, up through Bryce, and all the way back. So they've now had as many miles in their leisure time as they have coming back and forward.
In my mind,
Is that
I'm picturing
reasonable?
that drive, and that's like a whole day's loop. That's not like, you'd have to
It's a
spend.
county drive, they're not doing the limit.
That's what we have in Snow Canyon State Park. It's a smaller loop.
Very small loop. That's one that I would say would be one that they get counsel on. If we had somebody from our county that had that, and our vehicles are tracked, the mileage is tracked, even when, so for instance, I've got a rental vehicle because our motor pool was completely checked out, so we used the state contract through Enterprise, but they'll still track my mileage to make sure that I'm not excessive. They know how many miles up it is, they know what's reasonable, and that's something where if they come back and say, okay, look, we're gonna kind of yank on your leash a little bit and say, that's not what we consider reasonable.
Right. Because, I mean, I can see some people saying, well, yeah, if they've never seen Zion, that's perfectly reasonable. They're already in St. George. For them to take the afternoon and go through Zion, that's reasonable.
Well, and
I have a commissioner that would say that.
Yeah, I know you. I know your commissioner.
So as the HR group, a lot of times what we would do, or you'd have a person doing, is they would schedule a team building activity. And one person would drive, and that's something that I would say, okay, as part of a team building activity, it was part of a conference, and you guys went off and went and hiked Canaryville Falls. Okay, that's a team building activity. It takes a little bit more work to cover yourselves. One example that I would give, so I have a second job, and that's Navy. And when I was on active duty with the Navy, I had a very good commanding officer. This commanding officer covered himself in a lot of different ways, and he did it in creative ways. And my command was over in Denver. I was running the Utah and southeastern side of the command. And he came over one day and was conducting businesses. We're driving over to the airport to drop him off. He asked me a question. He said, Lieutenant, I want to give you a pop quiz. I want you to tell me if you have a sailor who has been over in Denver and has been at training and has been working all day long and is now catching a flight back home. He's got a government vehicle sitting at the airport, and his home is between the airport, his home is between the airport and the office. Will you authorize him to do a domicile duty? You're going to allow him to take home his government vehicle for the night, instead of going back to the office, dropping it off, and picking up his personal car. I said, well, how long has he been up for? He said, he's been up since 5 in the morning. Had some training, now he's been doing other stuff, and now he's wanting to come home. He's going to fly in about 8 o'clock at night. So that's easy. That's operational risk management. I'm absolutely going to authorize him to take that government vehicle home. He said, great, sign my form. He didn't want to tell me that he was asking me to sign his form, but he was covering himself ahead of time to say, what would you normally do? And if we can get people in our organizations to start thinking along these lines of saying, okay, how do I protect myself? How do I go out ahead of time and say, what is the one step that I need to do right now? Because I do want to see Zion. I'm going to be down there. Can we do a team building? Can we get people together and say, how can we sell this as something that we can tie back into business? The person who's looking for excuses to say, I'm down here, Vegas isn't too far. A lot of leisure down there. It's a 2-hour drive, reasonable. Not really. I think if we can start to get people to think along those lines, it becomes a much easier sell.
Well, Sonia will tell you about the days when at the UAC conference in St. George, at night, half the conference was in Mesquite.
I believe it.
But that wasn't me.
No, it's
She heard about it later.
a friend of hers told her, and that trip still gets made by some of the elected officials. So,
In their personal cars, I bet.
yeah, but then thinking ahead and protecting yourself is another thing I forgot to bring up, but I wanted to talk about, is because some employees will look at that, and again, some thought, well, I'm just, I got 20-some years in, I'm just going to not deal with it, I'm just going to retire. Others are going to think about other ways that they're going to protect themselves from not accidentally doing this, like, no, I'm not taking the truck home anymore, and so when I get called out in the middle of the night, it's going to take me an extra hour to show up to the emergency because I'm first driving my personal vehicle to the courthouse to pick up the truck, or to the road shop to pick up the truck, and then I'm going out because I'm not going to get called to task that I used that truck for personal use. Or I am, for the first time in days, in weeks since this came up, this is my P card issued by UCIP, my purchase card, state office or state sponsored purchase card. This is the first time I've carried this thing in a couple of months now. It stays locked up in my drawer. I will not carry this around in my pocket because I am not accidentally going to use this when I'm at Shields or the gas station or anything like that. And you are going to have employees that are going to refuse to do things like that. And I talked to Seth Olson at the state auditor's office this week about it. That Seth, I'm not using the UCIP state P card. I'm buying it on my personal credit card, and they can reimburse me because I'm not going to take the chance that something that I buy with the UCIP card gets called into question is that it was personal and not for business, or that I do accidentally use it. What are you going to do as an employer at that point in time? Now the department head to say, because I know in some counties, using this card is a big deal. They want you to use it for everything so that they get the 2% back. And now you've got your employees saying, I'm not using it, I'm going to use my personal card and you can reimburse it. It causes a couple problems. It causes the problem that how do you manage that? Especially if the county does want them using that card so that they get the 2%. And number two, now they may have gotten points or cash back on their own personal card, and the state auditor's office has a real problem with that too. Or miles. I mean, his position is you use your personal card for county business and you got miles for it, those miles belong to the county. How do you keep track of that?
You police that.
Yeah. So there are some real HR-related issues with this that you guys are going to run into, I'm afraid, over the next several months. Hopefully we can take care of all these problems when we fashion a new bill. But who knows? We'll just have to wait till the session to see if we can. Anybody run into that yet? That employees won't use the equipment for work?
That's exactly what my employees did right away. That's fine, I don't want my truck. I think I have 3 people turn in cars. I've got several that won't use purchasing cards anymore. They just don't want to have anything to do with that anymore.
Yeah. Well, when the penalties is there it is. But
That's the same thing. I have staff that needs to go to training and stuff, and they're like, Dan, you'll pay me personal mileage.
Yeah.
And that's way more expensive than sending them in a county car.
yes.
But they're like, I don't want to go to jail over that county car, just because I want to go to the store 2 miles away in the evening after I had dinner or something, you know. So pay my personal mileage instead, you know, which we do. It's just, such a mess up.
So our county, if there's a car available and you use personal miles, you're only going to get about half of the going rate. So this will be interesting to see how things develop. We might have to change policy. In our county, we never allow people to use their personal vehicles, even when there's a car there, because of what you might be planning to do on the way there, or the way back, or whatever it might be.
Right. Yeah. So you have a policy that's similar to the state, that if there's a motor pool car available and you choose to use your personal, you don't get the full reimbursement. You get
We have that
someone
too.
that's in training in Salt Lake, they stay at a family member's house. They drive a work car up, they stay at a family member's house. They commute over to the training every day. So it saves a little bit of money on hotel. There's a little bit of per diem they get for staying there. But if I go up to the conference and stay at a hotel, then I go to a family member's house.
Reasonable leisure. Reasonable leisure.
And it's uncovered one way. Just interesting how all that works. I need a policy to go visit family where the other person can go stay with family and get it per diem.
Can you do a policy that says your frequent flyer miles is something would belong to the employee if they use their own? Or if you're, like, say you come here and you have a Hyatt membership and you get points for it, and it goes on your personal.
I would suggest you do clarify that in policy. Because again, an auditor may not like that you're allowing the employees to get those miles when it's really a purchase for the county. But at least now you can say that's our policy that was adopted by the governing body.
And it's the same with hotel points. Even if you're using that company card, the hotel's in the name, it's not number.
Right. Yeah. But if you don't have a written policy on it, and that's happening, you're probably going to get called to task that that's not appropriate. Those miles should belong to the agency, not to the individual. Again, how do you police that? How do you track it? How do you W-2 it? I mean, and again, you know, I know some people feel that coming to these workshops and conferences and things is really fun, and but it's a distraction too. I mean, as government employees, you know, we're away from our families. We can't get our work done at home in the evenings when we're out like this. So for the employee to get the, 500 miles on their credit card because they spent 3 days away from home and all the things that they could have done if they were home, I don't think is unreasonable. So if the governing body passes a policy that says they get to keep those miles and points, I think that's reasonable public policy.
Especially if you can't call
Get it.
home on your county phone.
Okay.
Well, and most private industry lets you, you know, it's
Well-
just hard because I know we're public funds, but the whole world allows that.
Yes, and that's
that's
a
what's hard.
big issue for you guys as HR directors. How many of you are having trouble keeping employees and you have positions you just can't fill? Those that didn't raise your hand don't have a sheriff's department. Because there's like 600 open positions in the state. It's ridiculous. And to compete as an employer, when you can't provide reasonable benefits and conveniences to your employees, it's really tough, because you're right. You know, my daughter works for a large engineering firm and does communications for them. And when she told them, well, I guess I gotta leave because I'm gonna move to California with my fiance, what did they say? They didn't say, oh, well, it's been great having you working for us, that's great. It was, here's a brand new laptop, here's a brand new iPhone, here's an unlimited data plan. Just don't tell your clients that you're working from California.
Oh my gosh. What is the name of that company?
That's what we're up against, trying to hire employees.
And they're paying them more money. Their benefits generally aren't as good, but they pay them a lot more money to make up the difference,
Yes.
you know?
So that's part of the conversation we're having with the legislature now. Is it's not just about you know, letting employees use the equipment but we have to compete.
Especially with corporate.
Yeah, absolutely.